Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Welcome to Strange Things, broadcasting from the Arkanasa Radio Studios in Laredo, Texas. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight we're going to be talking about what I called Indian oddities, but apparently they're not so much Indian as in just oddities that were blamed on the Indians. Tonight was supposed to be my 100th show. When I first started out back in April 2016, I thought I might do a few dozen shows before I ran out of material. I just kept finding strange things to talk about, and soon I found I was rapidly coming up on my 100th show. I used to number them when I first started out. I would have Season 1, Episode 1, Season 1, Episode 2, and then it was Season 2, Episode 1, and somewhere in all the counting and adding and missing a couple of shows, I lost track. Well, I did some calculating and I thought, okay, number 100 was going to be today. I'd planned to do something special. I talked to my wife and she said maybe I could do a highlight show. So I did a little investigation to be sure this was in fact the right date. It turned out I already had done my 100th show. It turns out L.A. Marzulli came on 2 weeks ago, and that had been number 100. So today is show number 102, and I'm not going to really do anything to celebrate the fact that I missed the show. Don't forget, the Out of This World UFO Festival and Conference is just about over. My wife and I are there right now, so if you're going to attend, you'd better hurry. I had to pre-record the show for tonight. Next Saturday is the Southeast Texas Bigfoot Conference in Huntsville, Texas. You still have time to get there, but don't wait until the last minute. They just might sell out of all the tickets like they did in Jefferson last year. Plan ahead. You've got one whole week. Archaeologists tell us they know all about the past, and if they don't believe something, it can't be true. They say the first people to settle in Americas came from Russia in 13,000 BP, across a land bridge that they still haven't proven ever existed. I had to look up BP to find out what the heck that meant. The scientists hate using BC for determining time. They refuse to acknowledge that Christ ever existed, so they came up with BP, or before present. So 13,000 BP would be 11,000 BC, or 11,000 years before Jesus lived. These archaeologists tell us there's no way anybody came here before that date, and that's final. Right up until the time an archaeologist found evidence of humans living in the Savannah River Basin 50,000 years ago. That would be 37,000 years before the last bunch of scholars had said they were here. It would seem that any time someone says this is the final word on any subject, just wait a bit and somebody will come along and prove them wrong. Next, we're all to believe that Columbus was the first ever European to set foot on this side of the pond. Even though Egyptian, Phoenician, Chinese, Viking, sailors were able to cross vast expanses of water, They were supposed to be incapable of getting from one side of the Atlantic or the Pacific to the other. What's on the other side of that huge body of water? No, don't care. A curiosity is not a modern invention. People have been curious ever since that first guy tried eating a jalapeno. So let's take a look at some of the artifacts and the legends that archaeologists say just don't exist. The Mandan Indians tell about King Mordock, who came from across the great waters sailing on the back of a whale. He met the Mandan Indians and lived in peace with them. The Mandans called themselves Numakaki, which means people or people on the bank. The Mandans say they originated from more eastern nations near the seacoast. They have a linguistic relation to the Ho-Chunk Indians, which my nephew is a member. The Mandans say they moved westward and north up the Missouri River. Prince Madog, or Mordock, and his brother Ryad sailed from Wales in 1170. He landed in what is today Alabama, and then explored some of the rivers running north. After making contact with many of the local tribes, he sailed back to Wales, where he convinced a bunch of his fellow Welshmen to come to the New World with him. As so many went along, it took 10 ships. Once back in Alabama, they took smaller sailing boats up the Alabama River, stopping to construct stone fortresses along the banks. Years later, explorers and pioneers found evidence of Welsh influence among the Indian tribes along the Tennessee and Missouri rivers. In the 18th century, the Mandan tribe was encountered. They looked more European than Indian, and they spoke what sounded like Welsh. Their village was laid out like a town in Wales, and the streets were laid out in a grid. They also had built stone fortresses in some of their locations. For fishing vessels, the Mandan used round wooden boats with hides stretched over them. These boats looked just like coracles, which are found in Wales. It didn't take long for a Welsh speaker to come along and talk to these folks. They said they were indeed the descendants of a group of people who had originated in Wales. In 1799, Governor John Sevier of Tennessee wrote a report where he mentioned the discovery of 6 skeletons who were wearing brass armor, and they were bearing the Welsh coat of arms. So the first European settlers might have come from Wales back in 1170, which was over 300 years before Columbus. Then there are the stories of the Egyptians coming to America long before that. G.E. Kincaid was in the Marine Corps. He retired in the early 1900s, and he went to work for a man named S.A. Jordan, who was an archaeologist. They were sent to the Grand Canyon to look for Indian artifacts. The two men searched the sides of the canyons looking for caves to plunder. Jordan was looking to make a name for himself in the scholarly world, while Kincaid was looking to make himself rich. Once they had exhausted all the easily reached caves, they began looking along the higher locations. There was an opening up the side of the cliff that, although nearly inaccessible, it looked promising. This cave was about 1,800 feet down the side of the canyon wall. It was also about 300 feet up from the river. This made getting to the cave extremely difficult. Well, the two decided they were going to try rappelling down from above. According to geologists, the river was 300 feet lower, or correction, the surface of the river was 300 feet higher in the 1900s than it would have been 3,500 years ago. Once at the opening, they could see the cave entrance had been reinforced. The stones had been placed around the cave entrance to keep it open and usable. The two men thought they had found an ancient Indian burial cave. Lighting their torches, they ventured in to see what they could find. The cave turned out to be more of a complex of tunnels that looked to be man-made. The walls were scored by tools welded some time long ago. The main tunnel ran straight into the cliff face. After following it for a few hundred feet, they came to an intersection. A second tunnel ran from right to left, and it was made the same way as the main tunnel. Someone had spent a lot of time chipping out these tunnels. The two explorers drew a map of the complex as they went. Following the main tunnel further in, they came to a hub of tunnels running in all directions. 13 tunnels projecting out from this central enormous room. Each tunnel led to a room filled with artifacts that could not be associated with the Indians. The artifacts all looked Egyptian, and there were mummies. Indians didn't practice mummification. These mummies were mounted in niches dug into the walls. There were swords that looked like something you'd find in Egypt, shields, and a few pieces of armor. The walls were covered in hieroglyphics that also resembled any tomb in Egypt. In one room, they found a statue of Buddha, something you won't find in any Indian site. The two adventurers had to leave their fantastic discovery and head back to town. Back then, the phone system was not very good. Either Kincaid or Jordan had to ring up the folks at the Smithsonian and convince them that they weren't drunk or crazy. The phone system would have allowed a lot of other people to listen in to the conversation. Now just think about it, trying to convince the guys back in Washington a cave filled with Egyptian artifacts had been found in the Grand Canyon. And don't you know, all the other people listening in were probably telling all of their friends. Somehow the two managed to get their point across. A convoy of trucks was dispatched to load up all these priceless discoveries and haul them away. According to a local newspaper, the Arizona Gazette of April 5th, 1909, a convoy of 90 trucks arrived at the canyon and were loaded to capacity. The convoy then struck out en route to Washington, where the artifacts were to be examined and catalogued. Well, once the trucks were safely out of the public eye, things took a turn for the worse. The Smithsonian immediately denied any trucks had brought anything from the Grand Canyon. Then they denied that Jordan or Kincaid ever worked for them. An inquiry today will be met with a stern denial of Egyptian artifacts ever being found in the United States. They have found several records that were correspondences from the Smithsonian to an E. Kincaid, dating from 1860 to 1908, not too far from M.E. Kincaid. The artifacts found were said to be in honor of King Akhenaten, who ruled Egypt back in 1353 to 1336 B.C. This would have been the time when the river would have been just about at the bottom of the cave tunnel. And with that, I am going to take a brief pause and see if I can get that cat out of the studio, and I'm going to play a couple of commercials, so don't go away. We'll be right back after this. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Do you have skin? Would you like to take better care of it? Call Lourdes James, independent beauty consultant, and set up an appointment. Call 723-3019. Coffee, nectar of the gods. And at the Organic Man Coffee Trike, you'll find coffee made the right way, one delicious cup at a time. Stop on by 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If your vision isn't what it used to be, and you're not sure you're seeing Bigfoot or just your neighbor mowing his lawn, stop on by Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, just across the street from the Embassy Suites. You should be able to see what you're looking at. Did you hear a bump in the night and you think it just might be a ghost? Contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. That's the LPRS for all your other. This is Arkanasa Radio you've been listening to. And welcome back to the show. Today, if you go to the Grand Canyon, there are vast sections of the canyon that are off limits to everyone. The park officials say this is to protect the areas from visitors. One of these sections has what was called the Temple of Isis. There are hieroglyphics still visible on the sides of this pyramid-shaped mountain. Then there's the Tower of Set, as well as the Tower of Ra, which are also off limits. In the Smithsonian, there are several Egyptian artifacts on display that might have come from the Grand Canyon excavation. The note cards don't mention where or when these artifacts were found. Just east of St. Louis sits a huge mound complex. Some of these man-made hills rise up to 100 feet. There is evidence of a vast city having been built around these mounds. As many as 40,000 people could have lived in this city. The Cahokia Indians lived in the area, so the mounds became known as the Cahokia Mounds. It is quite a sight to see. I've been there, but that was a long time ago. I know it's well past time to revisit the place, but there are so many things to see just in our country that I don't have the time to visit them all, or let alone see any of them twice. The largest of the mounds is 700 feet wide, 1,080 feet long, and 100 feet high. It contains 22 million cubic feet of dirt. All that dirt had to be moved by hand. The people had to dig up, pack, carry up the steep incline, and then dump 22 million cubic feet of dirt. Each cubic foot of dirt weighs about 80 to 100 pounds, depending on how damp it is. Now think about this. About 1,100 years ago, somebody said, "I want a huge pile of dirt right here. Make it happen." So, for the next 600 years, the whole tribe spent their leisure time carrying dirt. 2 billion pounds worth. I'm sure somebody had to ask why. And this is just one mound. At one time, there were 120 mounds just at Cahokia. From the top of the tallest mound, you can see in all directions. But it would have been a whole lot easier to just use an already existing hill. There had to be some driving force that caused these people to put in so much time and effort just to build a mound. In Mississippi, there are 13 mound locations. Some are only a single mound by itself, whereas others are clusters of mounds, over 20 in one place. Some are just hills built up to a peak or a flat top. Some look like pyramids, and others are just a mound of dirt. No two are alike. Excavation has found some of these structures were simply to elevate somebody or something, while others were used as burial sites. Bodies were interred in a small mound which would grow as more and more bodies were buried. Bodies were buried in the same mounds for 1,000 years or so. If you stop and think about this, it does make sense. Instead of having a huge plot of land set aside for all the folks who died or are going to die for the next 1,000 years, just put them all in one big pile. As for some of these bodies, they sure didn't look like what the scholars say Indians looked like. Some were giants, as in 12 to 15 feet tall. They had hair still attached to the skeletons, bright red hair. Look at all the photos and paintings of Indians. You never see any real tall folks with red hair. So who were these people? Some legends say they were a race of super tall beings that inhabited the land long before the Indians arrived. When asked about these mounds, many tribes say that the mounds were there long before the tribe migrated into the region. To make matters worse, some of the legends say the giants were cannibals. Just a thought. If a chief says, "I want you to build me a huge mound of dirt to live on," it might just not happen. If, on the other hand, a giant cannibal says, "I want you to do something," the tribe would have been far more motivated to get the project done. The Serpent Mound in Ohio was guessed to have been built in the 1100s or thereabouts. A new survey of the area, combined with radiocarbon dating, has now shown the mound to be as old as 320 BC. That's 300 years before Christ arrived on this planet. If you came across the Serpent Mound while walking through the woods, you'd only think it was a berm that meandered through the trees. Only when viewed from above and after the trees had been removed do you see the mound is shaped like a huge snake. 1,348 feet long, it weaves back and forth, terminating in a huge head. In the mouth of the serpent is a giant egg. No bodies have ever been found in the Serpent Mound itself, but there are burial sites along the perimeter. Nobody is able to say who built the mound or why. It is guessed to be about 1,000 years old. The mound was built right next to a 5-mile-wide meteorite crater that was made about 250 million years ago. Let me correct that. It was not 1,000 years old. It was several thousand years old. The big question is, why did somebody build this serpent right next to the crater, and how did they know it was there? Standing on the ground looking out across the crater, it would look like a shallow valley. It took scientists up until 1970 to determine it had been caused by a rock from outer space. There are magnetic and gravitational anomalies in the crater, but you'd need scientific instruments to find them. How did the serpent builders know there was something there needing acknowledgement? Alongside the serpent are tunnels that run into the rock underneath the mound. Some of these tunnels are just a few feet deep, while others go down deep underground. There are carvings of what might be astronomical observations on the sides of some of the tunnels. On the ground at the mouth of one tunnel is a large monolith that had been carved from stone. Nobody knows what the monolith had been put there for. The Otanabe Serpent Mound in Ontario, Canada, also features a snake The Onatabe Serpent Mound in Ontario, Canada also features a snake with an egg near its mouth. These two serpents are 2,000 miles apart, which makes me wonder, what was the connection? There's also a serpent mound near Loch Ness that has a spiral tail that looks the same as the serpent mound in Ohio. It makes you wonder what our ancestors were thinking or seeing way back then. While excavating an Indian burial mound in Round Rock, Texas, archaeologists found several Roman coins at the bottom of the mound. These coins were found along with the usual burial objects: arrowheads, beads, and pottery. The coins were definitely ancient Roman, from the time when Rome ruled most of Europe. The mound was built about 1,200 years ago, about 800 AD. Not wanting to admit that the Romans had visited the Americas, it has been suggested that the coins were dropped near the mound, and then rodents carried the coins to the bottom of the mound. If you think about this, the experts are trying to convince us that some guy is walking around with a pocket full of very valuable Roman coins. He sees an Indian burial mound and decides to throw his coins on the ground, and then some miserly rat comes along and grabs the coin, only to deposit them in his hidey hole, along with a few dead Indians. This is about as believable as that weather balloon out in Roswell. How could Romans have made it to Round Rock? Well, Galveston Bay is only about 200 miles southeast from Round Rock. In 1886, an unusual shipwreck was unearthed on the shore of Galveston Bay. Once the wreck was excavated, the construction was determined to be that of a Roman merchant ship. All of those mounds are called Indian mounds. The archaeologists have been giving them this name, and it has stuck. However, many tribes say those mounds were already there long before their ancestors arrived in the area. And with that, I'm going to take another break, play a couple commercials, drink some coffee. I'll be right back after this, so don't go away. You're listening to Arkanasa Radio. Are you taking care of your skin, or are you going to wait and see how time treats you? Take care today by contacting Lourdes James, Independent Beauty Consultant, at 956-723-3019. Don't let time get the best of you. Coffee makes the world go round, and around here we have the Organic Man Coffee Trike, 4501 McPherson, Suite number 9. If you're not looking for coffee, try their tea. It's the best in town. And remember, life is too short to drink bad coffee. If you need to squint and hold things out at arm's length to see them, maybe you should get your eyes checked. Del Norte Optical, 107 Calle del Norte, is right across from the Embassy Suite scene. You're listening to Strange Things with Chris James. I have to take a break every once in a while to allow my brain to catch back up with my mouth, and to drink coffee. Just a side note, Ever wonder why so many towns in the United States are named Salem? Ever wonder where the name comes from? How about Jerusalem, as in Israel? Way back in the days of the colonies, the folks coming to the New World all wanted to connect with the Old World. Not old as in Europe, but old as in Old Testament. Yep, all those towns like Salem, Massachusetts, Salem, Arkansas, Salem, Illinois, just to name a few, are all named for Jerusalem. In Salem, New Hampshire, is a set of stone buildings and structures that baffle just about everybody. They're a set of stone structures that are believed to date back as far as 4,000 years ago. A few folks have come out and said the stone buildings were thrown together by some farmer back in the 1700s. Why would any farmer or rancher use these huge stones to build barns and stables when the area is full of trees that are a whole lot easier to work with and much more abundant? To gather, haul, and assemble these stones, the farmer would never have had enough time to raise his animals or his crops. The owners of the site came up with the name the American Stonehenge. Before this, it was called the Mystery Hill. The stone structures are all aligned with the stars. You can tell when the spring equinox will be by sighting along a few of the stones. The spring equinox is when the day is the same length as the night. The same goes with the fall equinox. This would be an extremely important time to know, since it would herald the coming of either the time to plant or the time to lay in supplies for the winter. If you were caught unready, you wouldn't make it until spring. Situated in the stone complex is a huge table. It's about 8 feet by 6 foot 3. The table has a groove carved around the edge that culminates in a spout at the base. The idea being, an animal would be sacrificed on the table and the blood collected in a jar. Then there's a tunnel built of stone with small openings all along its span that would allow somebody to whisper in a person's ear sitting on the other side. Now, where would such an idea come from? Back in ancient Rome lived a physician named Galen. He'd observed soldiers suffering from what today we call PTSD, or survivor's guilt. Galen had a garden built where the soldiers would go and sit, looking at a fountain. As they sat there, slightly inebriated from drinks and drugs, their backs would be against a stone wall. Someone would stand on the other side of the wall and whisper to them, "You're going to be all right," or "You lived for a reason," or sometimes, "You lived because the gods wanted you to." After a few of these sessions, the soldiers would improve enough to return to their units. A psychotherapy 2,000 years ago. The tunnel at the American Stonehenge resembles one of these therapy tunnels from Rome. The tunnel is called the Oracle Chamber. And then there is writing. Inscribed on some of the walls are what look like Phoenician script. Words carved into the stone. One professor of linguistics said it was definitely Phoenician. The second linguistic professor came along and said, no, it's not. So, who are you going to believe? The Mystery Hill or American Stonehenge is way too complex to have been used for animals or any kind of farming implementation. If you look at a map of the place, it's too crowded together, and there are too many small chambers to make any kind of sense for farming or agriculture. If you look at it as an astronomical or religious complex, then the place makes sense. The theory has been put out that this set of stone buildings had been put together by the Indians living in the area. The stonework doesn't match any stonework done by Indians anywhere in the United States. If not the Indians, then who? The stonework does match that found in England and parts of Europe. This could point a finger to the settlers coming to the New World, but they would have had to have been here long before Columbus. As far as 4,000 years was dated on the Mystery Hill site, using carbon dating that was used on charcoal found in the site. They came back to the year 2000 BC, or 4,000 years ago. In the same neighborhood can be found numerous stone structures that are sunk down into the ground. The settlers believed these were root cellars used by the local Indians. There were literally thousands of these structures. Not wanting to let a good underground storage building go to waste, the settlers began using them for their own food. With the passage of time, the descendants of these settlers began to assume that the cellars were built by their ancestors. All across New England, the same settlers found hundreds of stones with carvings on them. These stones were believed to be Indian carvings. However, the description of the carvings led some to believe they were inscribed with Celtic runes. The stones were carted off to be used to build homes and walls dividing one property from the next. No one knows how many of these carved stones were picked up and reused. The local tribes say their ancestors had nothing to do with building the underground rooms or carving the stones. Anyone looking at the workmanship would identify it as resembling Scandinavian or European style. But since these stone rooms were old long before the settlers arrived, they simply had to be made by the Indians, despite what they said about it. All over New England can be found constructs called dolmens. A dolmen is a table-like structure consisting of 3 to 5 stones stood on end, with one stone placed on top, making it look a lot like a huge table. The top stone could weigh anywhere from 20 to 90 tons. What makes these tables so bizarre is they are identical to dolmens found all over Europe, England, and down into the Middle East. Not just similar, but exactly the same. In the mountains of Jackson County, North Carolina, is a stone covered in carvings. The carvings could be some ancient writing or a form of hieroglyphics no one is familiar with. Most people will agree the stone was carved about 3,000 years ago. When the stone was first discovered, the settlers decided it was Indian writing. Most of the people who looked at it thought it was just a curiosity. The Cherokee said it was not theirs. The rock with the carvings had been there long before the Indians arrived. When somebody got around to examining the carvings, they found no relationship to any known language. Cherokee legend says the carvings on the rock were made by Judicula, a slant-eyed giant who ruled the mountains long before their ancestors migrated to the area. The Judicula was the great lord of the hunt, who could leap from one mountain to another. He was also able to control the weather. They believed the rock was there to mark his territory. It is supposed to have a 7-fingered handprint embedded in the stone from when he fell and landed on it. The Cherokee treated the place as a sacred site. In recent years, a group of students from Western Carolina University used the rock in some form of late-night ritual to initiate new members to some fraternity. Just about any time the students have performed their doings at the rock, strange and creepy things have happened. Those present have heard sounds coming from around the rock that sounded like a disembodied voice. Lights have been seen emanating from the rock, and Orbs are seen flying about it when viewed from a distance. UFOs are seen flying around in the air in the vicinity of the stone. The stone sits at the base of a mountain with a large copper vein running right under it. The mountain is filled with a variety of minerals and metals. There have been electromagnetic anomalies recorded all around the Judical rock. At one time, there were 3 rocks with the same or similar carvings located on the same property. One rock vanished and can't be traced. The other was buried during a mining operation. There just might still be a few others scattered about the mountain that have not been found. The land is wild and overgrown. Folks who study the rock all came up with their own interpretation. Some folks refuse to accept the Cherokee had nothing to do with the carvings. They insist the rock is an Indian artifact. Others say the carvings are some form of ancient language they have yet to decipher. Until someone finds the Judicula rock Rosetta Stone, we might never know what it says. Today, the Judicula rock is suffering from the weather as well as vandalism, and some folks have little to no regard for historical markers. The Davenport stelae were 3 stone tablets found while excavating an Indian burial site in Iowa in the 1877s. Soon, a group was discovered to have carved 2 of the stones, a hoax on the public. Members of the Davenport Academy of Science had carved 2 of the stones. In my mind, those folks should be barred from ever working in any form of science for the rest of their lives. Nothing they ever found would have been considered to be real, but that's just me. The last stone is believed to be genuine. It is a replica of a calendar that was found in Egypt. This calendar is supposed to be from the 22nd dynasty of the Egyptian Empire. A thorough examination has ruled it out as being a hoax. The Museum of the Seminary at Sherbrooke in Quebec, Canada, there are 2 stones carved with writing that tell of a visit by Egyptians to the Americas in about the year 500 BC. According to the inscriptions, people from North Africa visited the Americas 2,000 to 500 years ago. The stones had been in the museum for well over 100 years, but they were only researched after 1910. The 2 stones were unearthed in a field near the St. Lawrence River. The river flows into the Gulf of St. Lawrence, and from there into the Atlantic. The inscriptions are written in a format called boustrophedon. You read the first line from the left to the right, and then the next line you read from right to left. The writing, as well as the stones, showed no signs of ever being hoaxed. There are all kinds of artifacts spread throughout North America that say there have been visitors coming from Scandinavia, Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and China for thousands of years. This has literally been carved in stone. On numerous occasions, the local Indians have said they didn't carve these stones and they didn't build those mounds. So why would scholars and scientists want to destroy, erase, or change a possible history that is different from what most people accept as our history? What could possibly motivate somebody to go to extreme measures to keep history secret and not come to light? Money is usually a very good reason. Think about a college professor who makes his living teaching history from a book that he wrote. Most books sold to students tend to run to the expensive side. You know the professors are getting a lot of money selling their books and their ideas. Those ideas will only bring in the big bucks as long as history agrees with them. Should some alternative history come to light, let's say the Vikings discovered America, those professors teaching Columbus discovered America will suddenly be looking for work. Columbus Day would have to be replaced with Leif Erikson Day. Columbus, Ohio might be called Ragnar, Ohio. The kids would no longer learn that 1492 story. It might go a lot farther than that. The land that once belonged to the Indians might come into legal consideration. The whole idea of manifest destiny would be placed under a microscope, and the history being taught about America might just have to be changed. As time marches on and more evidence is found, combined with the old professors with a vested interest retire, someday soon we just might learn what our history really is. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. I had to cut it a little short because I have to get ready to go to the UFO conference in Edinburgh. Don't want to miss out on that. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends. Let them know that the archives are free at strangethings.podomatic.com, and you can also find us on YouTube, but you have to spell out the whole name, Strange Things with Chris James, or you'll wind up with that TV show. If you'd like to contact the show, you can write to me at strangethings@arkanasa.com. Till next week, this is Chris James.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, no stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree.